And I'd like to thank you on behalf of everyone involved tonight in coming to our Caregiver Relief Forum. And this really is a forum. It's supposed to be interactive. We will see a video. It's about 25 minutes in length. It's called Second Opinion, Caregiver Burnout. During this video, we're going to ask that you think of questions that you have or experiences that you have and you would like to ask our panelists. Write those down on a note card that there are some over available by the doorway, or a notepad if you have that. And then as you think of them, just pass them along to me, and I will read these questions to the panelists afterwards. I'd like to give special thanks to the Jacob and Valeria Langluth Foundation for supporting this program, as well as Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association, as well as North Fulton Regional Hospital and Vita's Innovative Hospice Care for partnering with PBA 30, as well as the Atlanta Forum Network. And I'm told that tonight's program will be available in about 5 to 10 days, so on the PBA website under the Atlanta Forum Network. So if there's something that you want to take a listen to again, a question you missed, or if you want to share this with someone else, just go to the PBA website, which is pba.org. All right, so again, we're going to take a look at the video. It's entitled Second Opinion, Caregiver Burnout. If you think of a question, write it down and pass it along to the corner here, and then afterwards we'll entertain the questions with the panelists. Again, thank you for coming tonight. While the panelists are getting seated, I do want to make a mention. As a caregiver, normally on this night, the third Tuesday of the month, there's a caregiver support class or session that normally meets. It's called Taking Care of Me. It's the third Tuesday of every month right here at North Fulton Regional. It's next door in the classroom. It's free to anyone who wants to attend, and there's more information on this note card here over at the table. So if you're interested in joining that support group for yourself or someone that you know, please pick up some information. I'd like to now introduce our panelists. First, we have to have Dr. Ranjan Paul, who is the internal medicine physician. We have Dr. Leena Dutta, North Fulton Regional Hospital hospitalist. Dr. Ruth Sarmiento, Medical Director of Vita's Innovative Hospice Care. Fred Whitehurst is the Bereavement Manager and Community Liaison with Vita's Innovative Hospice Care. And Kamela Sooknanan, Director of Case Management for North Fulton Regional Hospital. First, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and offering your expertise. First question, and we're just going to open this up to anyone who wants to offer an opinion, or is how do we utilize information that we get from the internet? How do we utilize the information to discuss this with our doctors? And are there particular sites that are better than others as legitimate resources? So a very good question about the information that's out there on the internet.
I think that the recommendation that I would make for websites that may be better than others is to utilize those for aging services. They probably will take you to links that offer those caregiver support groups and things like that. As far as using the information that you're getting, my suggestion to you would be, if you're unclear of which is better than the other, discuss all of it with your physician, because they'll be better able to sift out the information that would be most useful depending on what's going on with your family members or your loved ones at the time. So they'll be better equipped to point you in the right directions as to which ones might be beneficial to you given the situation that you're in.
As a physician, when my patients ask me what websites to go to, it depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for disease-specific information, then I would go to sites such as WebMD, which basically just give you simplified information regarding the disease. If you're looking for support groups, or if you're looking for things that are based on aging, then I would really go to the official associations. For example, when there was a question about somebody's child and immunization, my recommendation was going to the Academy of Pediatrics. Similarly, when there has to do something with aging, then there are specific sites based on aging and geriatric care. When it comes to hospice, there are websites that are specific for palliative care, whether it be end-of-life care. And if you just simply Google those things and go to the official websites for that disease process or for that condition or for the caregiving support, then you're more likely to get valid information, or that's at least information that we as healthcare providers use ourselves. And so you would have access to that information.
I would just like to add on to that. What I usually advise my patients in my practice is some of the sites which are very, very valuable and very authentic, like National Institute of Health, and you can, most of the times you will find links from their site, their educational material which is there, and you can really depend on the information you're getting. So if you want something on aging, go to National Institute of Aging, and if you go to their site, there'll be, a number of links which you can find which is going to give you authentic information. Plus, based on that, you can discuss with your physician too, and the physician doesn't have to sort out, the data which is not kind of very authentic. Here, there's some data which is coming from very reputable agencies.
To the physicians, do you find that the patients who are coming to see you have a lot of misinformation that they've received from the internet? And how, as a caregiver, do you deal and kind of make that judgment call that this is good information or this is not good information?
I think the most difficult thing trying to differentiate everything that's on the internet is what is anecdotal information. I'm an oncologist, and one of the things that happens in my practice is that many patients will come and they have heard of some sort of tea, some sort of colon cleanser, some sort of, again, anecdotal information. And they're bewildered. They're not really certain if this is going to work for their loved one. Part of the problem that I think those who are not in the healthcare field is that they don't know what to ask. And because you don't know what you don't know, if that makes any sense at all. So where do you even begin to start? My father's of a generation that computers were not the thing. So for him to, at the time of my mother's illness, to go on the internet and to Google would make no sense at all. So for those patients, again, I strongly advise that you allow your physician to be the intermediary between you and the world out there. And it is very unfortunate that there is some misinformation out on the internet. So everything that is on the internet, everything that is on print, everything that is advertised is certainly not valid, and I would caution all of you, obviously if you're going to be taking care of a loved one, to be very careful. When things are advised, and again, it is not on a website that is reputable, that you know, that has information that has been validated through multiple clinical trials, then I would say caution, big red light, and go through your primary care physician or a specialist that he or she has recommended.
Another question. We talked about, or the video talked about siblings and how to work within that relationship. The question is, what if the individual is not well enough to have that type of conversation with the sibling or another family member? So we might be talking about multiple people with illnesses having to make decisions. How do you deal with that situation?
Really, in that situation, what I would recommend is that the siblings get together their individual experiences with for example, the parent, and say, well, Mom, when she was better, had said these things to me. And then the other sibling may say, well, Mom has said this to me. And I think if you put the full spectrum of each of those experiences together, it would be up to the siblings to then come up with a consensus as to what would Mom have wanted in this situation. And then try to do the best possible for Mom if Mom was in this situation, this is what he or she would have wanted, knowing that this is what they had commented when they were well enough, and this is what they had said when they were well enough.
Yes, working with families, that are going through so much. I mean, everyone is so prone, as we just saw, at risk for guilt. And it is great, in a sense, when the person that is declining or needs care has stated their wishes or can communicate. I mean, in this, what we just saw, we don't know how much communication was able. We could tell some was happening, which is really great. But even in those cases when the person is so declined or not able to communicate, as Dr. Dutta says, any level of an attempt to communicate. And through family stories sometimes you can get clues as to what mother or dad, grandfather would want. And because everyone, there's just no easy answer in those situations, but at least you're communicating and you're venting and sharing and getting it out amongst each other, because it's a hard road to bear just on your own.
Go ahead.
I think one of the most important things also to keep in mind, this is a very difficult time. The focus should always be on the patient. Unfortunately, families in times of stress, things from the past tend to come out. Petty grievances, sibling rivalries, things that were not forgiven from the past, all of a sudden sprout back up. Again, because of the stress that the family is under. And what I encourage my patients when they're in that situation with their family is to say, now's not the time. Yeah, maybe mom gave brother that extra piece of pie or gave sister that piece of jewelry that you wanted, and maybe mom showed a little more, or maybe dad did this or that, but now's not the time. The emphasis needs to be on bringing the family together, coming up with a game plan. And it may not be a game plan that everyone is actually going to be 100% on board with every aspect of that game plan. It may just be that they agree with certain portions of it. But at least to begin, as you said, communicating amongst the family. And there has to be a peacemaker. There has to be one person, hopefully more than one person, within that family unit that's willing to kind of back down, let communication continue, perhaps give some ground where they feel they're able to give a little bit. But emphasis needs to be on the patient.
I think that sibling rivalry when they're dealing with a parent or a loved one is something that's very, very common. That's something we deal with all the time and we see. And one of the areas in which that we have to help the family to focus on is a lot of times siblings that are dealing with parents are at different places in the grieving process or the acceptance process, because the burden of taking care of a parent has fallen to the one sibling who has had a dominant role, and that particular one is further along the grieving process or at the place where they're more able to accept what is going on with a parent. So many times we find that you have to allow, in mediating between siblings and family members when you're dealing with them, is you somehow have to help the ones that are further along to understand and be tolerant with the ones that are just now getting to that place. And at times, just with that kind of patience and understanding, they'll get on board.
Just to sort of also cap that off is, right now we may be talking about mom, but dad may be involved in this decision making as well. I would also have you listen to dad and say, when dad's time comes, you've already had this conversation. So you've started this conversation with mom, and yes, mom's not able to have that conversation right now, but dad is here, he's involved, and he is voicing his opinion. Pay attention to what dad is saying, and maybe start that conversation with dad now while he's able to have that conversation. So yes, you're focusing on the patient here, mom, and you've got issues to deal with here, but think about the opportunity that this presents for other conversations as well.
Thank you for the question. Do we have other questions?
I'd like I may, just to kind of dovetail into what we're talking, this last round of comments, I was working with a family this week, in fact, and the patient, or actually the couple, was attending a support group, and the husband is suffering from Parkinson and other ailments, but very much, in fact, the first time I met him, he could hardly express himself, but he's been doing some physical therapy and some rehab, and so he was fairly responsive and tracking absolutely what we were saying. But he's, of course, speaking very, very slowly. And we have other members of the support group, but we were really having a lot of feedback and self-expression. But I noticed many times his wife, the caregiver, would tend to answer for him and feel for him almost. And I understand that. But I remember at some point I was talking with him, and I asked him, what's the world like for you now that, and because we'd heard his story, he was so active, that you can express yourself, but it's half the time people probably aren't going to take the time to listen. And he took his time and he said, the world is becoming very far away from me now. And I looked at his wife, and she just went, it was like caregivers have they carry so much. You saw Beth just in the video. And so they sometimes, even the greatest caregivers still struggle, I think, to fully accept or to listen sometimes to the patient. And so you can imagine how that gets compounded with other siblings and all the rivalry. But listening when possible, maybe not even verbally, but gesture. Trust your gut in terms of family, but listening to the patient and responding to their needs, number one, when possible.
Just to add on what Dr. Dutta said, when in the family member, the significant other is alive and is able to take decisions, I think so that person's wishes are probably the most important and kind of be taken into the top rather than, the kids and the other relatives and other friends are also a part of the group making decisions, but what I want to point out is the significant other is the most important person. If he has the capability of making that decision, should be having the first and the last say probably, with the input of the other family members.
It's very easy to armchair quarterback, as we saw with Evelyn. When we step away from the situation, we can see that Evelyn doesn't really have a cold and she doesn't really need antibiotics. But if we're in her position as a caregiver, how can we step back and say, hey, I'm experiencing problems myself, maybe I need some help? What are the signs that people should look for in themselves?
I just can't say enough about caregiver guilt. And in a way, it's not like you're aware of the guilt. You're working hard. You are just giving it all. You're almost martyring yourself in one sense when you're out there, like Evelyn, and maybe Beth to a degree too in her story. It's a revelation when I have seen people when they first come to a support group and they begin to see and hear. It's like you can feel the flooding or the opening of the fountain, because they begin to hear so many situations with other people, and it's like they've been living in their very isolated world. And so how do you, like they say, go to your primary care physician? Can't say enough for, is it Lisa in the video? She was, what a listener, and instead of just prescribing, and broke the cycle, you might say, and got, by listening, underneath the person. But certainly, even when doctors are not as responsive, or the whole formally, people that you trust, good listeners, they may be in your religious or area, or it may be if you know of support groups that are really good, but good listeners can help the person break the cycle, I think, that insular drivenness, and at some point said, invite them, give them permission, give you, the caregiver, the permission to begin to imagine taking care of yourself. I say that a little cynically because when you're such a driven caregiver, you're not going to imagine taking care of yourself. It's your duty and all of those things, and yet it makes such a difference.
I think sometimes, unfortunately, it takes some type of a crisis to really, for people to realize that they do need help. And yes, physicians are available for, quite often patients will come in with 3 or 4 complaints. And generally when we see somebody coming in with 3 or 4 different complaints that don't go together with one type of syndrome, we know that there's something else going on underneath. And that's when we stop and we ask, why else? Or sometimes when it's a very demanding patient, that's generally the one that needs the most time to say, hey, time out. Let's chill and see what's really going on underneath the surface. But I think what you're asking is what can we do to try and identify maybe impending burnout before we get to that point? And that's where I think with Fred's comment of listening. Yes, unfortunately at the physician end we see it once it's already getting to that point, but I think if you can confide in a friend, confide in somebody, when you think that you've got too many things to juggle and that one of them, if you don't keep them in the air, one of them may fall, that may be the time to think and say, wait a minute, what can I do to make sure that there's a safety net underneath so that if one of the balls does fall, it's not the end of the world. And I think just not enough of us do that self-care. And that happens not just with caring for an elderly person, a parent or whatever, happens with moms that are working, juggling work and juggling being a wife and juggling being a parent at the same time. And that can happen, that type of a burnout can happen in any situation. Same thing with dads, just trying to work 2 jobs, trying to make a living, try to put food on the table, especially in the job market right now where most people are underemployed and therefore have to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. Well, they have to do that, plus be a parent, plus be a husband. It just gets to be too much, and at some point I think we just need to say, okay, let's just take time out before things get to that head.
And I don't think there's one model for caregiving, even including the self-care, but I can, in hospice work where I've been with families when their loved one has died, and it's amazing. I can remember several situations where, and you can't believe the sense of healing. I know it may sound ironic, but healing when they say, I really know that I did everything I knew humanly possible to be there and provide care for my mother. And, and even though they may be grieving, which is very natural, there is that sense of self-acceptance. And I just want to give a high five to when that happens, because they didn't get there overnight. But it's like they realize, and I think the model of it kind of they kind of imply during the video, but a managerial in terms of yourself, or I think of a young parent managing all the different things you do, but as a caregiver, okay, this is where I need to be, or okay, we've got the sitter coming, or I'm going to help feed mother at breakfast, but there'll be, this is this whole array of management tasks. And so instead of seeing that as carrying it like a martyr, it's like, okay, given this, number one, I've got to keep managing, I've got to stay healthy, what can I do? So when you've managed the care all the way through, you are still there. You're not in the hospital, you're not sick, you're not out of control, so to speak, and it really works. I mean, it's not like, I forget the person, but it is a type of hell. But what did she say? There was a sense of joy or a sense of coping in the midst of that, and the clarity. I'm going on here, but it's a special place when a caregiver can have that sense of self-acceptance, and it's usually when you've been a heck of a good manager.
A sense of achievement that you've actually done something for
That's
this
right.
loved one.
That's right.
May I just ask who among you are caregivers? Okay. Well,
Just a handful in the audience.
and I think it's a very, very difficult situation that you probably have found yourself in. Let me share with you a little bit about my background. being of the Asian culture, we feel very strongly about caring for our parents at home. And so I'm an only child, so my parents are both with me. They're caring for one another, caring for me. Things that I think caregivers need to look for when they are about to have a breakdown is if you used to have joy in doing certain activities and you no longer find pleasure in them. If you find that you have no time to do anything else because you feel so consumed with the care of your loved one. When you find yourself, if you are typically a very patient person, suddenly losing it, snapping, those are the kind of signs that I think everyone obviously should recognize, but surprisingly many of us don't recognize until it's too late. And too late meaning you have a nervous breakdown, your blood pressure goes up, and you have to be hospitalized, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think looking at yourself carefully when you are a caregiver and realizing that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say to your brother or your sister, you know what? It's your turn. I need a break. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to go to the church and say, is there anyone that could volunteer for just an hour to give me a break? Because if you don't, you may end up being the one being cared for in the hospital. With my family, I didn't realize how difficult it had become for my father. He was younger than my mother, and my mother was getting progressively worse in all of her health issues. But I saw my dad, who was probably one of the most patient men that I've ever known, suddenly losing it, just short-tempered. And that's when I began to see. And it took a long time. It took a long time before I finally took the lead and said, Dad, we can't do this anymore. We can't do it without help. I mean, I know you love Mom and you want to take care of her, but we just can't do it anymore. And I just ask all of you, don't wait until you're to the point where you're actually maybe requiring health care yourselves. It does come very rapidly, surprisingly so. It can come like this. So continue to evaluate. Look at some of those things. Look at a change in the pattern of your behavior. If you're starting to see those things, then perhaps it's time to step back and to begin to ask for the help that you need.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank all the panelists.
I was just going to say, I do want to stress something that Dr. Sarmiento said, is you don't need to feel that you need to have somebody else replacing you or share half that burden of care. You'd be surprised how many different places you can find help. It may be going to the church for an hour or two to help, have somebody come over to watch your, the person you're giving care to for a few hours while you go get some grocery shopping done or whatever. It may be just, having the local babysitter come by instead of babysitting for a child, can babysit for your loved one. Or maybe having people from the church bring you a meal because that would be one less responsibility for you. So you'd be surprised at how many different places you can find help and how you can patch together that help to be there for you. So you don't have to feel that somebody else has to be there putting in as much time as you're putting in to provide that care.
Go ahead. Have a question?
Yes, I would like to say four things. One is in the support groups, we can reach outside of our own religion. A Christian, as you all probably know this, but a Christian or a Catholic could help a Jew or a Hebrew, and vice versa. The Jewish community could help the Christian or the Catholic. It happens all the time. Other things I've heard you talk about, especially in the sibling rivalry and also caregiving, and it's a phenomenal field now, the mural behaviors or mural misbehaviors, and there's a lot to be learned about that on PBS or in the medical community. The other thing I heard him say was listen without judgment, especially with the sibling. That's so hard for people, all of us, to do sometimes. And the other, I heard a doctor the other night. The guy called in to talk to the doctor, and the man was a caregiver. He said he was up all night, every 2 or 3 hours. So the doctor said, listen, if you can sleep between 9 p.m. and midnight, that 3 hours, if it's available, you'll get such deep, solid sleep. And he told him why. Because the guy had to keep getting up every 2 or 3 hours to roll somebody over, etc. But could y'all speak about maybe some of those 4 topics also, which you have, some of them?
Are you talking about specifically that as far as ways that you can patch things together, like you said, the gentleman who needed the sleep, or are you talking about, I guess one of the things we can talk about that I can sort of talk to is the religion aspect that you brought up. Absolutely. There are things in some religion that provide for outlets that other religions may not. I think one of the things that, for example, Beth Richardson, the caregiver on the video, talked about, she obviously had one set of ideals or spirituality about her that she wanted to sort of have a certain type of death, for example, that she expected for her parents to have or her husband to have, and they had a different one. And maybe if, for example, they were open, if for what they were going through, their set of beliefs was not enough to carry them through, like you said, being in a support group or being exposed to another type of thinking, another type of spirituality or another type of religion may provide answers that one may not. And I think, like you said, it does happen all the time. And that's where support groups become that much more valuable, because you're in your own little role here, your own little world, and it's very hard to sort of see beyond that world if you don't know that this exists in other places and how other people have dealt with this. And you're given ideas that you may not have thought about otherwise. So that's, I think, one very important thing. And I think the other thing that you alluded to as far as self-care, making sure that getting even 3 hours of solid sleep. If you know you have to turn somebody every 2 to 3 hours, if you spend half an hour worrying about it, another half an hour thinking about, okay, I need to get to sleep so I can get up in an hour, well, you only get an hour here or there. I think if you sort of set your alarm and say, okay, this is what it's going to be, and until then, I'm not even going to think about it, not worry about it, that again comes back to self-care, where you need to say, okay, if I'm not well enough to take care of this person, then I can't be their caregiver. So it's okay. And the other thing, I think one of the things we always worry about is the guilt of taking care of ourselves. If I take care of myself, I'm not there taking care of my loved one. Well, I think you have to flip it a little bit. If I don't take care of myself, then I'm not there to take care of my loved one. And so taking care of yourself is as important a part of being available for that person to care for. And how you do that, some of those ideas can come from calling into shows, doctor shows or otherwise, support groups, the internet. And yes, there's a lot of information out on the internet, but sifting through some of those blogs, as long as you keep it, look at everything with a colored eye, you sort of keep a skeptical mind, you'd be surprised at some of the ideas that come through. You don't have to do exactly what somebody else is doing, but something that triggers something in your life that you may say, hey, I can use that idea. So certainly I encourage all sorts of, talking or reading or whatever exposure you may have in that wonderful free time that you have, but keeping open mind and keeping open to different ideas is very important in order to continue to go on with your role as a caregiver, I think.
Well, I know families sometimes, siblings can, and you know better in terms of your formal thinking, but emotionally you get demonized when you get around each other, and a whole lifetime of all kinds of attitudes get dumped on each other, and there you go. But if you can be aware of those propensities, if that's the case, but still strive to communicate with siblings. You saw in this video where the brother did show up at some point. And I think I was reading in the transcript where he actually began to visit the nursing home where his mother was. But If you can think of ways to help the system, everybody own a part of it, even if you've got the main caregiver, the older, perhaps a child. But still, if that main caregiver can be willing to suspend maybe some of the judgments and try to, it's a creative system if you read between the lines that we've seen tonight. It's not about how much you know and how much you can control, but so if the families can't, even if it's a minimal amount, well, can you show up for a couple of hours on Sunday? And that allows for the opportunity of other possibilities and begin to share the caregiving. And in the system, I must say, there have been many times when you see the craziness of, in say, in a hospice context, and mother comes on hospice and the family, it's just a mess in terms of their communication. And when mom takes her last breath, it could be 6 months later or longer, and you see them trust, and you see communication, and you see blessing. What a testament to your mother and to each other. It can happen.
Just to add on and answer your question also, when you come to a support group, it's not just that you're going to get more ideas, it's a catharsis for you too. I mean, you are expressing your frustrations and your emotions, and the other sense of that you're not alone in that kind of thing. There are other people who are undergoing the same kind of thing, so it's very, very comforting and also therapeutic in that sense when you're coming out and talking to other folks who are kind of undergoing the same kind of, they're having the same kind of problem. So, coming into that support groups, you're getting the ideas, so you're getting that, plus you're getting some kind of therapeutic benefit from that too. Second thing which I wanted to say, I forgot.
The one area I think that's really important for us to share with caregivers is creating schedules, planning ahead and scheduling maybe out a week at a time. We talk about getting help and getting support quite a bit. We forget that a lot of people don't have the resources to pay for additional help or support in the community, and help is expensive. A lot of insurances are not, this is not a covered service where somebody can come in and offer you some respite and things like that. But if you tap into church members, friends, senior agencies that are in your community, a lot of them will offer a few hours a month of free care that somebody will come in and help you with grocery shopping, a little bit of housekeeping, that kind of thing, and you plan for it ahead so that it's scheduled and it's visible for you to see. Will a lot of times help families through this. And, helping people to understand that it's okay to ask for help. What we find a lot of times is when we deal with our families, they won't share back with us many times that they can't afford to pay for help, to get somebody to come in and things like that. So I think we need to take this self-initiative to give all the options that may be available to them and give them permission to use it. It's okay. A lot of people are in that position right now.
The other thing, like when you are taking care of a loved one in that kind of situation where we talked about that you're getting 3 hours of sleep, if you actually try to match your activities according to their activities, you can give yourself some rest, plus be able to kind of, take care of them also rather than getting very stressed out. Secondly, to say if they are not sleeping during the night and they're only sleeping during the daytime, you want to kind of, do the same thing, like, take cat naps during the daytime. I know it's not natural for you, but there's no easy solutions to these things. You have to kind of try and adapt to what's happening with your loved ones. So that will ease things for you. The other thing which, again, I mean, taking care of a loved one who needs your help, this is an opportunity you've got in that sense. So it's not like that it's a burden which has been thrown. At least that's the way I think. It's a gift which you got. In short term, we all are very up to it. It's the long term where we start kind of, it's like, really eroding, a small erosion is going on. That's where, I mean, what we call as a burnout, or, that frustrations, depression, all those things start creeping in. So actually you can be preventive in that sense that once you know that these things exist, what you can actually do is to try to prevent this kind of thing happening. You ask, like we discussed, ask your siblings, ask your friends, ask other resources to kind of, give you a break, so that it still remains a joy, a gift which you've been given, so that you actually enjoy taking care of you. Your parents have taken care of you all life long. This is an opportunity which has been given to you or to me, which not everybody gets. So if I look at it that way, that I've gotten a gift that way, but again, at the same time, it becomes hard over time period to kind of keep doing the same thing again and again, and it is becoming totally overwhelming and encompassing your whole life that way. So you want to kind of take preventive measures and have somebody help you. And we discuss about so many ways by which it can be done.
All right, and for our panelists. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to talk about such an important issue. Just some housekeeping notes. If you noticed on the table over here, along with the brochures, there was a yellow sheet of paper. It's a survey. If you wouldn't mind filling that out, so we can do this better and greater next time. And in exchange for that, you'll get a token for parking. So parking is validated free. And again, caregiver support group here at this location, the third Tuesday of the month. It starts at 6:30. And if you would like to see this again or recommend this to a friend, in about a week or two, this will be available on the PBA website. That's Public Broadcasting Atlanta, pba.org. Thanks so much for coming tonight.